Mom and Dad expelled me after my favorite son brother wrongly incriminated me. He jeered at me, labeling me a nobody, so I vanished from the area until 365 days later when the reality revealed itself, and my phone went crazy with 31 missed calls from every family member. Be me, 21-year-old male. Lost my mom in a car wreck when I was 8. Just a normal Wednesday. She went to the grocery store. Never came back. Dad, 44, and I managed on our own for about 2 years. Bachelor pad style. Lots of pizza and frozen burritos. We were doing okay. Then Tanya, 41, entered the picture. Dad met her at some industry conference. Was basically obsessed from day one. She was all smiles and fake sweetness. Dad fell for it hook, line, and sinker. Tanya brought her son Ethan, 21, with her. Same age as me. From day one it was clear who the real son was in her eyes. Dad was too busy running his contracting business. Didn't notice how things changed when he wasn't home. Our house had always been my safe place. After they moved in, it became enemy territory. First time I realized how bad it was going to be, about 2 weeks after they moved in. Tanya rearranged the entire house, including my room. Threw out a bunch of my stuff without asking, including this old basketball my mom and I had caught at a game. When I got upset, she told me I was being dramatic, said I needed to make room for the family. Dad just shrugged it off when I told him, "She's just trying to make the place nice, buddy." Ethan was a sneaky little prick from the beginning. When we were 12, he broke Dad's expensive watch, then planted it in my backpack. Tanya found it during one of her random searches of my room. Yeah, she did that regularly. Dad grounded me for a month. Ethan smirked behind his back. That became the pattern. Ethan would pull something, blame me. Tanya would back him up. Dad, wanting to keep his new wife happy, usually sided with them. By high school, Ethan had mastered the art of making my life hell. He'd steal money from Tanya's purse. Then suddenly my wallet would have an extra 20 in it. He'd fail a test. Then somehow my backpack would have a crumpled copy of the answer key. Every time I tried to explain, Dad would just look disappointed. "I don't want to hear you blaming your brother again," like I was the problem. Every time I tried defending myself, I'd somehow end up grounded. Of course, it was an unfair 2 versus 1. The worst part wasn't the punishments. It was watching my dad slowly stop believing in me, the man who taught me to always tell the truth. Now looked at me like I was a pathological liar. The guy who used to call me his best buddy started treating me like I was just some problem he had to manage. Tanya controlled the finances, the house, everything. Dad handed over his paycheck like a good little soldier, and she managed it all. Anytime I needed something for school or whatever, I had to go through her, which meant getting interrogated about why I needed it, and usually being told no. Meanwhile, Ethan would get $100 to go to the mall with his friends, without even having to ask. When college applications came around, Ethan got a private tutor to help with his essays and SAT prep. I had to figure that out on my own. He got into state with a mediocre GPA. Tanya threw this massive party. I got into a better school with a partial scholarship. They barely acknowledged it. Couldn't afford to go anyway, since Tanya had made it clear they wouldn't be contributing to my education. "College isn't for everyone," she'd say. "Maybe you should consider trade school instead. Nothing wrong with trades." But this was clearly her way of saying I wasn't worth investing in. Despite all that, I managed to graduate with decent grades and get into community college. I stayed at home to save money, working part-time at a local hardware store. I kept my head down, avoided Ethan when possible, and counted the days until I could afford to move out. Just 1 more year of saving. That's all I needed. But they had other plans for me. See, Ethan was failing out of state. He'd spent his first year partying instead of studying, and now he was on academic probation. Tanya was freaking out, because she'd bragged to all her friends about her genius son at college. Dad was stressed about money, because his business was going through a rough patch, and there I was, working steadily, taking classes, building a little savings account. The tension in the house was getting worse. Ethan was home more often, picking fights with me over stupid stuff. Tanya was drinking more, slamming doors and snapping at everyone. Dad was working longer hours, probably to avoid coming home. It was like living in a powder keg. The day everything went to hell started like any other. I had morning classes, then a shift at the hardware store, then was planning to study at the library with my buddy Nathan. Dad had been extra stressed about some business expansion he was planning. Tanya was being even more of a pain in the ass than usual. Ethan had been suspiciously quiet for about a week. He was never quiet unless he was plotting something. I got home from my shift around 6 p.m. to complete chaos. The second I walked through the door, I knew something was seriously wrong. Dad's face was red. Looked like he might actually have a stroke. Tanya was screaming into her phone at someone. And there was Ethan, sitting on the couch with this weird, calm expression that immediately set off alarm bells in my head. Dad spotted me and practically lunged across the room. He grabbed my shoulders hard enough to leave bruises, getting right in my face. "Where is it?" he demanded. I had absolutely no clue what he was talking about. "Where's what?" I asked, trying to step back. Tanya hung up her call and started yelling about how $50,000 in cash was missing from Dad's office safe. Apparently, he kept emergency money there for the business. Stupid, I know, but he's old school like that, and had been planning to use some of it for the expansion. Now it was gone, and somehow they decided I was the one who took it. That's when Ethan spoke up, all calm and concerned, saying he'd seen me messing with Dad's safe the day before. His voice had that fake sincerity that made me want to punch him in the face. The thing is, I hadn't even been home much the previous day. I was at the library with Nathan all afternoon and evening, working on a project, but Ethan had thought of everything. He said I could have easily gone into the office before leaving for the library, doing those air quotes. Dad's office was always locked, and only he had the key, or so I thought. When I pointed this out, Tanya jumped in with, "We found the spare key in your desk drawer." A key I'd never seen before in my life, but of course they'd found it in my room. How convenient. Tanya was already tearing through my room like a tornado, ripping through my drawers and closet. "You better tell us where it is," she kept screaming, while Dad just stood there, eating me with his eyes. She found a receipt for a storage unit in my jacket pocket, a jacket I hadn't worn in weeks. Dad's face just kept getting darker, as she waved it around like she'd discovered the murder weapon. I tried calling Nathan to back up my story about being at the library, but of course, he wasn't answering. That would have been too convenient. I was starting to panic, realizing how perfectly I'd been set up. It was all too coordinated to be anything but a frame job. "I didn't take anything," I kept saying, getting more desperate as I watched my dad believe their lies. "Why would I steal from you? Check my bank account. I don't have the money." Tanya twisted that too, as if he'd keep it in his account. "He's not that stupid, Greg. That's why he has the storage unit." She was smirking now, enjoying watching me squirm. Ethan was still pretending to look concerned, but I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. Nathan finally called back around 11 p.m. and confirmed I was with him studying, but Tanya immediately painted him as my accomplice. Of course his friend would lie for him, she told my dad, who just nodded along like this made perfect sense, because clearly my plan to steal $50,000 would include bringing a witness who could place me away from the scene of the crime. Brilliant detective work there. I kept running through options in my head, trying to figure out how to prove I didn't do it. But Ethan had been planning this for a while, probably from the moment he realized he was failing out of college. Then Dad suddenly stood up, looking at me like I was a stranger who'd wandered into his house. Not his son, not someone he'd raised, just some criminal he wanted gone. "Pack your things. I can't have a thief living under my roof." Just like that, with this cold, emotionless voice, like he was talking about taking out the trash, not kicking out his own kid. I tried one more time to make him believe me. "Dad, please, I didn't take the money. Ethan is setting me up. He's always trying to get me in trouble. You know that. How can you believe him and not your own son?" He cut me off with a sharp gesture. "Always blaming Ethan, that's your problem. You never take responsibility for your actions. I've put up with the lying, the attitude, but stealing from me? That's it, I'm done." Tanya was hovering behind him, looking satisfied. Ethan watched, not even trying to hide his smirk anymore. "He won. You've got until tonight to return the money," Dad said. "Otherwise, don't come back." I looked at him, trying to find any trace of the man who used to take me fishing, who taught me to ride a bike, who held me when I cried after Mom died. There was nothing, just this cold, angry stranger wearing my dad's face. So I packed. What else could I do? I stuffed some clothes in my backpack, grabbed my laptop and some other stuff, and the one photo of my mom I kept by my bed. I didn't have much cash. Maybe $60 total, no car, nowhere to go, and my own father thought I was a thief. As I walked toward the front door, Ethan stepped into my path. "Sucks to be you," he whispered. Just low enough that Dad and Tanya couldn't hear. "Maybe you should have been nicer to me." That's when it clicked. This wasn't just about creating a distraction from his college failure. This was payback for every time I'd stood up to him, every time I'd called him on his bullshit, every time I'd refused to be his doormat. I shouldered past him and walked out of the house without looking back. I stood at the end of the driveway, watching the only home I'd ever known grow smaller as I walked away. 19 years old, basically homeless, with my entire future derailed by a lie I couldn't disprove. Should have seen it coming. Should have moved out sooner. Should have realized that in this house, I was never going to win. But standing there in the street all alone, I made myself a promise. this wasn't the end of my story. Not by a long shot. The first night after getting kicked out was a real eye-opener. Nothing like being suddenly homeless, to make you realize how much you've taken for granted. Basic stuff like having a bed, a shower, or knowing where your next meal is coming from suddenly becomes your whole focus. I spent that first night on a bench at the park near campus. It was March, still pretty cold at night, and I kept waking up shivering. My backpack made for a shitty pillow, and I had to keep one arm looped through the strap, so nobody would steal it while I slept. Every noise woke me up. People walking by, cars on the street. Some raccoon was sitting over my head staring into my soul. By morning I was exhausted, stiff, and feeling like complete hell. First thing I did was try calling Dad, thinking maybe he'd calmed down overnight. Straight to voicemail. I texted him, "Dad, please can we talk about this?" All I got back was, "Return the money or else don't call." So this wasn't some 24-hour punishment that would blow over. I was actually on my own. I couldn't go to campus looking like I'd slept in a park. No shower. Same clothes as yesterday. Probably smelled like ass. I tried washing my hair in a gas station bathroom, but the attendant caught me and kicked me out. Called me a bum, and threatened to call the cops if I didn't leave. My phone kept buzzing with texts from Ethan. "How's the streets?" And "Should have been smart, bro." And "Dad's trashing your stuff today." Each one felt like a punch to the gut. I had $47 in my bank account, no place to sleep, and my own father thought I was a thief, and there was absolutely nothing I could do to prove otherwise. The worst part was walking around campus that day, watching everyone go about their normal lives, while mine had completely imploded. I sat in the library all day just to be somewhere warm, trying to figure out what the hell to do next. When the library closed, I tried sleeping in a 24-hour McDonald's, buying the cheapest thing on the menu, so they wouldn't kick me out. That worked for a few hours, until a manager noticed me nodding off, and told me to leave, then tried the stairwell of a parking garage, even worse than the park bench. Concrete is not meant for sleeping. Finally, I got hold of Nathan. We weren't super close friends or anything, more like study buddies, but he was a decent guy. I tried to keep it casual, just said I was having family issues, and needed a place to stay for a few days. He must have heard something in my voice, because he didn't ask many questions, just said I could come over. His parents were the kind of people who actually give a shit about others. When I showed up looking like death warmed over, they didn't freak out or get all judgmental. His mom just made up the couch with sheets and a pillow. His dad asked if I'd eaten. They were cool. They didn't push for details, just said I could stay until things settled down. I almost lost it right there in their living room. Just from basic human kindness, after days of feeling like the world's biggest outcast, that night, showered and with a full stomach for the first time in days, I broke down and told Nathan everything. How Ethan had framed me, how Dad had chosen to believe him without evidence, how Tanya had practically danced with joy as I was thrown out. He actually listened to me, which felt like a miracle at that point. I had to drop out of college. There was no way to focus on classes. When I was trying to figure out where I'd be sleeping in a week, plus I couldn't afford tuition now that Dad had cut me off. Another win for Ethan. He'd not only gotten me kicked out of the house, but also derailed my education. Finding work was a nightmare. Every application asked for an address, and my friend's couch wasn't exactly inspiring to employers. I finally got hired at a warehouse loading trucks on the night shift. The kind of job where they don't ask too many questions. As long as you can lift heavy stuff and show up on time. The pay was garbage, but it was a start. Nathan's parents were saints, but I could tell they were wondering how long this arrangement would last. 2 weeks in, I overheard his dad asking how long I was planning to stay. Not in a mean way, just concerned. That night I counted my warehouse paychecks and realized I had just enough for a security deposit. On the absolute shittiest studio apartment in town. The place was a complete dump. Roaches everywhere. A shower that alternated between freezing and scalding with no warning. And the whole building smelled like the Thai restaurant on the first floor. But at least it was mine. And nobody could kick me out as long as I paid rent. Moving in was depressing as hell. All my stuff fit in 2 garbage bags. No furniture, except a used mattress I got for $15 from some guy on Craigslist. The first night there, I sat on that half-inflated mattress, eating cold ramen, no microwave, and just lost it. Cried like a little kid, 20 years old, and my life was already beyond recognition. The warehouse job was killing me. 12-hour shifts of heavy lifting. Supervisors yelling constantly. Minimum wage. My back hurt constantly. My hands were always cut up, and I was so tired most days that I'd just come home and pass out on my air mattress, without even eating. But I kept showing up because the alternative was worse. I know it sounds petty, But I kept trying to reach Dad those first few weeks, refusing to believe he could do this to me. But eventually he stopped responding at all. I drove by the house one more time and saw they'd installed a security camera pointing at the driveway. Message received. The hardest thing was accepting that my dad really believed I was capable of stealing from him. After everything we'd been through together, after raising me on his own for years after Mom died, he still chose to believe Ethan's lies. That more than being homeless, more than sleeping on an air mattress with roaches crawling over me, more than anything, it left a scar that probably won't heal. Over time, Nathan was the only person who stuck by me. He'd come over sometimes, bringing leftover food from his mom, or just hanging out in my sad little apartment. He never made me feel pathetic, even though we both knew I was at rock bottom. That kind of friendship is rare. The kind where someone sees you at your absolute worst and still chooses to be there. That's how I knew he was a real one. About 3 months in, things got even worse. The warehouse cut back hours, so my already tiny paycheck got even smaller. The building where I lived had a water leak that the landlord refused to fix, so my ceiling was growing black mold. And to top it all off, I got mugged walking home from work one night, lost my last 20 bucks, and ended up with a black eye and busted lip. I seriously considered giving up, not in a dramatic end-it-all kind of way, but more like just accepting that this was my life now, and it wasn't going to get better. Maybe I'd always be the guy living paycheck to paycheck, in a roach-infested apartment, working jobs that treated me like I was disposable. There's this weird clarity that comes when you hit absolute bottom. When you've lost everything, you realize you've got nothing left to lose. And in a weird way, that's freeing. I'd been raised to think success meant college, career, house in the suburbs, all that conventional stuff. But now that path was closed to me. So what was I supposed to do? I remember sitting on the floor of my apartment thinking, well, this is it. This is as bad as it gets. So the only direction from here is up. And that's when Nathan showed up, with a 6-pack of sodas and an idea that would change everything. That night, Nathan showed up at my whole apartment. He had an actual plan. We were sitting on my floor, still no furniture besides that sad air mattress, when he pulled out his laptop and started showing me these designs he'd been working on. I've been creating these custom gaming controllers and skins, he explained, flipping through images of some seriously cool-looking designs. People online will pay good money for this stuff, but I don't know how to set up a website, or handle orders and shipping, and all that business crap. I didn't get what this had to do with me, until he said, "You've always been good with computers and organization. What if we partnered up? Start small, see what happens." My first reaction was to laugh in his face. Here I was working a job that barely covered rent, and he thought I had the bandwidth to start a business. But Nathan wasn't joking. He actually thought this could work. "Look, what else are you going to do?" he asked. When I didn't respond, "Keep killing yourself at that warehouse job until your back gives out? This could be something, man." He wasn't wrong about the warehouse. My supervisor was a complete jerk who seemed to enjoy assigning me the heaviest loads. And at 20, I already had the back of a 50-year-old construction worker. I was going nowhere fast. So I said it. Why not? What do I have to lose? We started with absolutely nothing. Built a basic website using free tools. Invested what little we had in materials. $200 from my side. Mostly money I should have spent on food. And worked on filling orders at night after our day jobs. The first month we made $87 total. Split 2 ways. It wasn't even enough to buy decent groceries. But weirdly, having a project to focus on made everything else more bearable. The warehouse job still sucked, but it wasn't my whole life anymore. My apartment was still a dump, but I spent less time there, because I was at Nathan's working on controllers. For the first time since getting kicked out, I had something to think about, besides how much my life sucked. The second month we made $212. The third, almost $400. By month 4, we were getting consistent orders, mostly through word of mouth. Turned out Nathan's designs were actually pretty damn good. And my obsessive attention to detail, thanks for that one, Dad, meant our quality was solid. We started getting repeat customers, which in a niche business like custom controllers is basically the holy grail. Around month 5, we caught our first real break. Nathan had been sending free samples to gaming YouTubers, basically begging them to check out our stuff. Most ignored us, but this one guy with about 100,000 subscribers actually featured one of our controllers in a video. Orders jumped overnight. We went from maybe 5 to 10 orders a week to over 40. Suddenly, we were scrambling to keep up. I cut back on warehouse hours to focus more on the business, which was scary as hell. That steady paycheck, shitty as it was, had been my safety net. But the gamble paid off. By month 6, we were making enough from the controllers. that I could finally quit the warehouse completely. We moved operations from Nathan's parents' garage to a tiny rented workspace, basically a storage unit with electricity. But it was a step up. Started buying materials in bulk to save money. Created an actual system for tracking orders. Instead of the mess of spreadsheets we'd been using, real business stuff. Month 7, we hired our first part-time employee, a community college kid who needed flexible hours. Month 8, I finally moved out of Roach Central, into a decent one-bedroom apartment. Nothing fancy, but clean, functional, and with neighbors who didn't cook meth in the unit below. I bought actual furniture, a real bed, a desk for my computer, small stuff that most people take for granted. But to me it felt like winning the lottery. The business kept growing. By month 10, we had 3 part-time employees, and were looking for a bigger workspace. We expanded beyond just controllers, into custom PC builds, which had bigger profit margins. Nathan was handling all the design and creative stuff, while I managed the finances, customer service, and logistics. Turns out I had a head for business that I never knew about. It wasn't all smooth sailing. We had supply chain issues, customer complaints, and an employee who tried to steal from us. Normal business problems. But compared to being homeless, these were problems I could actually solve. The 1-year mark from getting kicked out came and went. I was in a completely different place than I ever expected to be. Our little side hustle had become a legitimate business, with an actual office, employees, and monthly revenue that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. I had moved again, this time to a nice 2-bedroom apartment in a good part of town. The hardest part of all this success was letting go of the anger. Every time something good happened with the business, part of me wanted to rub it in my dad's face. Look what I did without you. Look what you missed by choosing Ethan over me. But I never reached out. That bridge was burned. Then almost 18 months after I'd been kicked out, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in a long time. It was Dad. I was in the middle of a meeting with Nathan and our employees, discussing a potential partnership with a gaming accessory company that wanted to carry our products. When I saw the caller ID, I actually froze mid-sentence. Nathan noticed and asked if everything was okay. "It's my dad," I said, staring at the phone like it might explode. Nathan made some excuse about needing to check inventory, clearing the room so I could take the call privately. I let the phone ring a few more times, debating whether to answer or let it go to voicemail. I wanted to ignore it, to make him feel what I'd felt when he wouldn't take my calls. But I really wanted to know why he was calling after all this time. "Hello," I kept my voice neutral, like I was taking a call from a stranger. His voice sounded rough. "Son, I need to see you. It's important." I almost laughed. Now it was important, after a 1.5 years of silence. When I asked why, he told me he couldn't do it over the phone. Then he begged me to meet him. His tone made me really curious. So we agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown the next day. I barely slept that night, my mind spinning with possibilities. Had he finally figured out the truth? Was he sick? Was this some kind of trap? Why did he call after all this time? Walking into that coffee shop was surreal. I spotted him immediately, looking like he'd aged a decade. The strong, confident man I'd known was gone. This guy looked beaten down, exhausted. "Thanks for coming," he said as I sat down across from him. He stared at me for a long moment. "You look good, son." "Different." I didn't reply, just waited for whatever bomb he was about to drop. He took a deep breath. "Okay, let me tell you then. Tanya is gone. She left 6 weeks ago. Not what I was expecting." "Gone where?" "I found out she was cheating on me for years, apparently." He bitterly laughed. "And she's been stealing from me, from the business, tens of thousands over the years. She cleaned out our accounts before she left." I kept quiet, letting him continue. "She left with her yoga instructor," he added. "And Ethan." "Ethan went with her at first, but they had some kind of falling out. He's been calling, asking for money, but..." He trailed off, and I prompted. I needed to hear him say it. Dad's eyes filled with tears, and I was wrong about everything. When they left, I found evidence. Ethan had texted Tanya about how they'd set you up, how they'd taken the money together. He even admitted it in a text to me later, throwing it in my face that he'd framed you, called me an idiot for believing him. He was right. I was an idiot. I chose them over my own son. There it was. Vindication after all this time. My dad finally knew the truth. But instead of feeling satisfied, I just felt tired. "So what do you want from me?" I asked, already guessing the answer. "I need help," he admitted, looking down at his coffee. "I've lost everything. The business is struggling. The house is going into foreclosure. Tanya took everything she could get her hands on before she left." "Where are you staying?" I asked. "Motel 6 off the highway. That's all I can afford right now." The irony wasn't lost on me. 1.5 years ago, I'd been the one with nowhere to go. Now our positions were reversed. "You're my son," he said, mistaking my silence for consideration. "We're family, real family, blood, not like Tanya and Ethan." I couldn't help but laugh. "You kicked me out with nothing. You chose them over me without a second thought. You didn't even try to hear my side. I know I failed you. I've been thinking about your mother, what she would say about how I quote." Something in me snapped at the mention of my mom. "Don't bring her into this. You don't get to use her memory to manipulate me. You tossed me aside, ghosted me when I needed you the most, didn't even try to know if I was alive or not, and now you're expecting me to forget everything and play happy family like nothing happened?" "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I really am, son. Please. I need help. The house is going to be gone soon. I've got nowhere to go. I'm asking for another chance. I promise I'll make everything up to you." I stared at this man, my father, who I'd once idolized, who I desperately wanted approval from for years. Now he was asking me for help, after he'd thrown me away like garbage. You can't make anything up. Damage is done. And honestly, I'm good on my own. After 1 minute of awkward silence, I asked, "How does it feel to have nowhere to go? To be desperate? To have your life destroyed by someone else's actions?" His face crumpled. "I deserve that." "Yeah," I nodded. "You do." We sat in silence for a long moment. Part of me wanted to tell him to go to hell, to feel the same abandonment he'd made me feel. But then I remembered the man he was. Before this whole Tanya and Ethan mess ruined our lives. The man I'd loved for most of my life. "I'll think about it," I finally said, standing up to leave. "That's all I can offer right now." He looked up at me, hope and desperation fighting for control of his face. "I understand," he said. I was feeling strangely empty. The vindication I'd expected to feel was nowhere to be found. Just a hollow recognition that the man I once thought was invincible was just as fallible, just as broken as anyone else. And now he wanted me to save him. The irony was almost too perfect. But as I drove back to the office, I realized I had a choice to make. I could turn my back on him, like he turned his back on me, or I could be the bigger person. I still didn't know which I would choose, but for the first time in a long time, the choice was entirely mine to make. So it's been about 5 months since that coffee shop meeting with my dad, and I'm still processing everything that's happened since then. First off, I did end up helping my dad, but not in the way he asked. I couldn't let him move in with me. That would have been too much after everything. Instead, I gave him enough money for a security deposit on an apartment, and helped him get a job at the warehouse I used to work at. Basic work, nothing glamorous, but steady income. He took it without complaint. We didn't talk much about the past. It was easier to focus on the present, but I could tell he was watching me, seeing what I'd built from nothing, and I think it was slowly sinking in, just how badly he'd misjudged me. Sometimes after work we'd grab dinner. Awkward at first, lots of long silences. But gradually we started talking about real stuff. But let me tell you, sometimes karma takes its sweet time. But when it finally shows up, it doesn't mess around. So about 2 weeks ago, Dad got a call that left him white as a sheet. I was in my office when he knocked on the door, his hands shaking so bad he could barely hold his phone. "It's the police," he said, "in Chicago, Illinois. They've arrested Tanya and Ethan." Turns out after leaving my dad, Tanya and Ethan had moved to Chicago and tried to pull the same scam on Tanya's new boyfriend. They stole money from his safe. But this time they got caught. The boyfriend had installed security cameras after noticing money missing previously. The cops found Tanya's fingerprints all over the safe, and when they searched her car, they found a bag with the stolen cash, along with fake IDs and multiple credit cards in different names. Ethan was with her when they got pulled over, and he immediately started trying to pin everything on her. Some things never change. When the police ran their names, they found out Tanya had a history of similar scams in other states. Before she met my dad, she'd pull the same basic con. Date a successful guy with kids, slowly take control of the finances, then clean him out. Ethan was her accomplice in the more recent jobs. They found a storage unit, Dad told me, his voice breaking, with stuff from our house, including your mother's jewelry that went missing years ago, that hit me like a truck. I'd been accused of stealing my dead mother's jewelry. That was a new low I hadn't even known about. Tanya had told Dad I must have sold it for drug money, and he'd believed her. Just another lie in a long string of lies. The cops wanted both of us to come to Chicago, to give statements about our experiences with Tanya and Ethan. When we arrived, the detective showed us photos of the evidence they'd recovered, including my mom's jewelry in police evidence bags. Dad couldn't even look at the pictures. They also showed us surveillance footage from the latest victim's house. Clear as day. Tanya opening the safe while Ethan kept watch. The detective told us Ethan had flipped on Tanya immediately, trying to save his own skin by blaming everything on her. He's giving us details on every scam they've pulled together, the detective said, including how they set you up with the missing $50,000. According to Ethan's statement, he and Tanya had been planning to clean out Dad's accounts for months. The $50,000 from the safe was just the beginning. They needed me gone because I was asking too many questions about the finances and getting in the way, so they came up with the perfect plan to get rid of me while also testing whether Dad would choose Tanya over his own son. 2 birds, 1 stone. On the flight back home, Dad finally broke down completely. Right there in a crowded plane, this man who I'd never seen cry completely lost it. I failed you. I failed your mother. She made me promise to always protect you, to always believe in you, and I broke that promise. I didn't know what to say. I was still angry. Will probably always be angry. But what I saw was a broken man who's lost everything and is trying to make amends the only way he knows how. When we landed, I made a decision that surprised even me. I told Dad he could stay with me for a while. In my spare room, not permanently, but until he figures out next steps. It's been a week now, and it's awkward as hell. But we're trying. The business is doing better than ever. Nathan and I are talking about opening a second location, maybe even developing our own line of gaming accessories. I've got 6 full-time employees now, and we just signed a deal with an online retailer to carry our products. As for Tanya and Ethan, they're both facing serious charges. The prosecutor says with all the evidence they have, including Ethan's testimony against Tanya, it's basically a slam-dunk case. Dad's been subpoenaed to testify at their trial next month. Sometimes I think about how different my life would be if Ethan had never framed me, if I'd never been kicked out. I probably would have finished community college, gotten some ordinary job, and continued living in my dad's shadow. In some weird way, getting kicked out was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to build something of my own. Me and Dad, well, we're taking it day by day. He's still working in the warehouse, still staying in my spare room. Sometimes we talk about Mom, about the good days, and sometimes we sit in silence, both aware of all the years we lost, that we can never get back. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive him. Trust is like glass. Once it's shattered, you can glue it back together, but it'll never be as strong as it was. As for me, I'm doing better than I ever imagined I would be at 22. Own a successful business, have a nice apartment, even started seeing someone recently who seems pretty cool. The best part, every morning when I walk into that office, the employees all greet me with respect, and every time my dad sees it, I can tell he's thinking about what he almost lost forever.